Good morning and welcome everyone. You have Robert Migliori and Caitlin Stanistreet from Activate. We're here this morning to talk to you about, are you ready for your employees to work from home long term? There's certainly been a lot of interest in this area of late, and that's why we created this topic. We wanted to talk about the work from home scenario and also talk about some of the things that certainly the media and the public are not really addressing. And we're really focusing this morning on what are your obligations as an employer regarding the whole work from home scenario. So Caitlin and I will talk a little bit about the work that we do with preparing employers for their work from home employees, and we'll also look at what your obligations are. So let's launch into this. We've only got 30 minutes and we'd love to get some commentary and questions as we go along. So let's look at what the expectations are from a legal point of view regarding your obligations. We know that there's a duty of care and that there are risks, just like any normal workplace, for your employees working from home. Caitlin's going to talk about the musculoskeletal health and the musculoskeletal risks, and they're the more typical ones that we sort of understand from an ergonomic perspective. I'll talk about what an appropriate working environment is, and there'll be some surprises there. And then together we'll talk about psychosocial hazards. So why don't you start off with musculoskeletal health?
Good. So I think a great example here is this dude right in front of us sitting on the floor. So when your employees are working from home, you really don't know how they're working from home and how they are positioning themselves and their body. And there's a lot of risk that comes with that. So this guy here, he's looking down, he's got his neck flexed a lot. He's really not sitting in an appropriate position. And if he's doing this all day, he's not supported to sit in a good posture. So he is going to start feeling aches and pains and tightness that he may not have felt before when he was working in the office, set up at a really nice workstation that you've provided him. People are not educated too well on their health, so they're not aware of the impact that this sort of a poor posture might have on the day-to-day, and doing it every day working from home, or even just some days working from home, can have a really big impact on their bodies and the injuries that they may start to get.
And of course, this will have an impact on the person's psychosocial status. So what are their relationships like? What are their relationships like with their loved ones that they live with or their friends that they live with? And what are their relationships like with their work colleagues? If a lot of our communication is now via the virtual world, how does that impact on their ability to focus on progressing their agendas and also projecting their needs? So we know that communication is really only 7% of it is the spoken word. There's body language, there's tone, there's that tactile nature that you don't now have when you're working in a virtual environment. So people are missing those essential ingredients that actually build cultures and climate in a workplace. And we know that's having a profound effect on people's psychosocial happiness and relationships. And some of the work we do with insurance companies training their frontline call centres has identified people who've got significant anxiety, learning how to adapt to a work from home environment situation where they've had to come to grips with new technology, they've had to set up an environment that isn't naturally the place that they would work. And for many employers, we've taken this for granted. It's been a bit of a novelty for people, hasn't it? Oh, I'm going to work from home, I'm going to set up my laptop, and there hasn't been a lot of talk about, well, what are the implications on the person's mental health, their psychosocial relationships with people at home and in the workplace, and of course, how will this impact people long term?
I think the novelty definitely wears off. People might, be a bit more worried about, is their boss watching them more or watching them less? Some people become unmotivated, lonely, disconnected. Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things we really want to talk about that prompted this session was the fact that there was a media article about the working from home environment being the place that people really enjoy. People have been more productive since they've been working from home. But what actually is an appropriate working environment? And an appropriate working environment replicates the environment you once had in an office environment or in your industrial environment. So we know that there's a lot of research that talks about the likelihood that this will endure long term, and that this productivity test that has now happened as a result of COVID has meant that it's kind of okay for people to work from home, and it hasn't necessarily changed productivity. Certainly in our case, many of our team have been more productive working from home or working in a hybrid environment. Now, let's look at what these obligations and your duty of care actually are now. So you do have a duty of care to ensure the person is working in a safe manner. And as Caitlin pointed out, this kind of looks good, this guy sitting by his bed and doing his work, but it's not the ideal working environment. And over time, he will be impacted greatly on a whole bunch of different levels because of this. So yes, you've got to provide an ergonomic chair. Yes, you've got to have a good computer and video and keyboard setup. But what about electrical safety, fire safety, access and egress? Is the person cooking their meals at home? Do they have a fire safety plan, a fire blanket, a fire extinguisher? Who else is working and being in the home, and do they present as a hazard? And that may not just be a physical hazard, it might be a psychosocial hazard. The person may be living in a situation where they're separated from their partner, and that is as a result of a strained relationship where there may have been a past history of domestic violence. Will this new working from home situation precipitate more angst between these two people? And do you as an employer have an obligation to identify and then mitigate that risk? Well, certainly you do. You do have an obligation, and it's not something that you're necessarily cognizant of all the time, but something needs to be done to identify those risks and mitigate those risks and control them. So these are things we want to get you thinking about this morning. It's not simply about just letting someone do their own thing at home and not have any observation of what that actually is.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of these issues that come up from working from home, they come up when the issue's already happened. So if you understand your obligations and your duty of care, you can really try and address them before it becomes a problem.
For many of you, you might be thinking, well, this is all a little bit too much, and are we going over the top here? Well, you don't have to necessarily go and do a workplace assessment of every single individual working at home. What we're suggesting you do is you do some form of self-assessment. And the self-assessment helps the person understand what the risks are and what their own obligations are. So how do we identify the risks? The risks are not just about how they might be sitting by their bed and reading off a laptop. The risks are more to do with the actual work environment. Just like we're doing a risk assessment of our working environment in whatever workplace it is, we have an obligation to do that for every person working from home as well. So how do we understand how those risks can be managed? And how do we maintain your duty of care as an organisation? Well, the workplace health and safety legislation gives us a lot of guidance on this. And what we encourage you to do is to consider that the environment at home, it should be at least equivalent in its capability of supporting the individual and mitigating risk, just like any other normal workplace. And the self-assessment is the best way of identifying people that will need additional supports and additional help. Now, you may be thinking, well, I don't want to be buying all this stuff for people, fire blankets, fire extinguishers, new ergonomic chairs, and new computers. All these things can cost a lot of money.
Very expensive, yeah.
And there's no guideline or no regulation, at least at this stage, that stipulates that an employer is required to provide all of this equipment, whether it's personal protective equipment or actual work aids like computers and so on for people. I think it's a situation of looking at each and every individual on its merits and saying, well, if we're compelling you to work from home, then do we also have some sort of mutual obligation to fund some of the things that we know will help that person work safely and comfortably?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about asking the questions, because your employees are unlikely to tell you before it's too late. And then you can address it before it becomes a problem. Absolutely.
So for a lot of people who might be thinking, working from home is a luxury for my employees, is it really a luxury that is going to endure long term? We've been through a huge period of adjustment. Both our physical environments have changed, the way we engage with people has changed, the way we carry out our work has changed through new and ever increasing technological frameworks. But ultimately, we're still going to work and we're still getting paid to do a job. How do we make sure that that person, there isn't a threat to their work readiness? So if you look at work readiness as the measure, then that's probably the thing you want to be asking the person. Is there anything in your home environment that is going to impact on your work readiness? And that encapsulates the more holistic view of the person. It could be that they might be living in a shared home with 2 or 3 other people, and therefore they haven't got a private area where they can work comfortably in a seated manner without it impacting on other people that are in and around the home. So for many people, they're working on their bed in their bedrooms, and it's actually unbelievable that this is happening, but it is happening, and there hasn't been a published survey on where people are working, but many people have just made do with what they have and haven't necessarily thought about the long-term implications.
Yeah, by doing an assessment and asking the questions and getting an understanding of what that picture looks like, it's going to allow you as an organisation to decide, maybe you want to have the opportunity there for your employees to still, have an office space where they can come if they are in that sort of a situation. Yeah.
Caitlin, you've done a lot of these assessments in people's homes. What have you found typically when you've gone into someone's home and they're moving from working in an office to a home situation?
Yeah, I find a lot of the time people working in, a busy environment like their kitchen, for example, where there might be other people coming and going a lot. They're at a table that can't move, they're on a terrible chair, and they say to me quite frankly, they spend half the day on the couch, and all of these sorts of things. So I think having understanding the picture and then having an assessment with them allows them to be educated on really what they should be doing, and it gives them a bit of the responsibility that their body and their health and their productivity and the way that they work from home, it is their responsibility, but it's about being able to equip them with the knowledge so that they can take on that responsibility, rather than saying, no one's helped me, I didn't know, and then having an injury. They instead are made aware of what's best for them in that situation.
And so what you're talking about, what you've seen is people that their work environments might impact on their presenteeism. So how present someone is, how work ready they are will have a lot to do with the likelihood of an interruption they might have from another person in the home. interruption from noise, ambient noise, the person's ability to shut themselves off from the rest of the world within their home is going to be vital and very important to ensure before the person embarks on the work from home journey. So these are things we're encouraging you to think about and talking with the people who are either currently working from home on a full-time basis, in a hybrid role, or someone looking at actually making that transition fully to working from home. And there's certainly been a lot more interest in people making this a permanent part of their working life.
Great.
We've got a question we might have answered there. Let's have a look at who's asking a question there. The question is, how can home ergonomic assessments be completed? Does someone need to go into the employee's home, or is it possible via video? I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, really good question. So firstly, we do have a tool where a employee working from home can answer some questions online in their own time about their work environment. So that helps to paint a good picture. But obviously we need to be aware, people working away from the office, everything now is done quite virtually over Zoom and things like that. So we can absolutely do an ergonomic home assessment over video, speaking to the person and utilising, Zoom and their phone to get an idea of what their environment looks like, what their setup looks like. It's quite easy to do with the new technology now, I think, which is great. And a lot of people do also feel a little uncomfortable having, a stranger come to their home and visit and move it around and change it. So it certainly allows for a lot of flexibility, being able to do it over video.
The good thing about asking people to do this via video is you really get a picture, don't you, of not just their workstation, but the rest of their home environment. And through that, you get to ask them questions like, who else lives in the home? What is the fire and electrical safety like? A lot of people just have wires everywhere and they don't even really think about the implications of it being a fire safety issue as well.
Yeah.
It would be remiss of us to not tell you that, of course, we have something we can help you with here. We have an ergonomic profiler self-assessment. It can be done online. It can be sent out directly from you to your employee to have them complete that assessment. It's a very, very low cost. And this should be enough to tell you a story about the person's work readiness and their capability of working from home. I think it's a vital part of doing any risk assessment, and it should form an essential part of this whole working from home permanent or migration plan.
Yeah, and it's going to allow you to establish what employees might benefit from a face-to-face assessment, what employees, don't need too much support. There's some that would already be quite aware and set up really well, and you may not have to give them as much support as others. So this tool allows you to sort of categorise people into the service that you might provide them as well, which is helpful. And I guess makes it probably more cost effective rather than just saying, everyone's the same, we're going to give everyone the same in-depth assessment. This tool is going to allow you to realise that not everyone will need that, because some people are quite aware and responsible when it comes to their ergonomics and working from home. Yeah, good. So how are ergonomic assessments going to positively impact your business moving forward? So if you really are thinking into 2021 that you're going to continue allowing your employees to work from home, I think that's really great, giving them the ability to work more flexibly. If you've seen good productivity, why not? But you certainly need to think about weighing up the pros and the cons for you. So doing these ergonomic assessments is going to mean that you can make it more of a positive change for your business.
So obviously we're looking at preventing workplace injuries in the first place, and preventing, I always think that it's important to identify people who are going to have a workplace injury that they don't even realise is connected to how they're working. So working on your couch, and I have to confess that I'm also guilty of this. So that there's no perfect person here that doesn't decide to, after, at least for me, I put my children to bed, and often that's when I do my best work. I review my emails from the day that I didn't have a chance to do, and I spend time doing research, reading papers, writing longer pieces of responses during that evening. And I have a habit of sitting on my couch with a special screen manager attached to the couch, but it's often 2 hours in and I realise I've been sitting awkwardly. So then I move into an office if I know that I won't be there, that I'm going to be there for a longer period of time. So there's a real consciousness that you've got to try and cultivate with not only yourself, but also with your team. We know, interestingly, that all of the research that talks about psychosocial risk factors, and you're probably saying, well, what does psychosocial mean? Well, it's the relationship between yourself, the psychological part of yourself, and the social part of yourself. If you're spending a lot of time in a Zoom environment, in a virtual environment, you're going to be expending a lot more energy, and often people are having to speak loudly, they're having to convey them the non-communicative language in a more vivid way. So there's a lot of energy we're expending when we're talking to people in a virtual environment. We don't realise that our muscles are tighter, we're carrying some anxiety, and that can have a huge impact on our psychological and musculoskeletal well-being. So there is now a correlation, this mind-body connection between how we feel about ourselves and how it manifests in our bodies. And so our musculoskeletal health has a huge connection to our psychosocial, these psychosocial risk factors.
Yeah, that's great, and certainly allows you to address those problems that prevent those problems that you might see with your employees working from home. If you're talking to them openly about how they're feeling and how they are going working from home, then yeah, you can support them much better while we're in a bit more of a disconnected position.
Yes. We'd like to take some questions from people who are online with us now. So does anyone have any questions or any comments that they'd like to make? When you've
questions yet?
No questions. I think people are probably wondering how many of their own employees are sitting just like this fellow on the couch,
yeah.
and wondering why they've got neck pain.
Yeah.
There's a question there.
That's great. Thanks for providing your employees equipment. That's a really, really good start. Do you think hopefully your employees as well are educated on how to use that equipment? I think that certainly helps, but how are you going to address them with their behaviours? It is really difficult. You really, as an employer, can just provide them with as much possible support and education and equipment that they require to put them in the best ergonomic position. Unfortunately, when you are so distant, it is really hard to know if they're using these things properly. But at least you're not, I suppose, as liable for their injuries when you have already provided all of the necessary equipment and support that they needed. So I think if you had a worker who did unfortunately get an injury from working from home and being in a poor posture, if the evidence is there that you've supported them, you've set them up effectively, and you've done everything that you can, I think that that's certainly what you can take then perhaps to an insurer to show that you have really supported them as best possible.
Yeah, I think there's a comment from Alita there saying, I think this is going to be a big issue in the future and that many businesses are not assessing this process at all. And we agree. This is why we brought this issue to everyone's attention this morning, because what we can see is that in most cases, it's been this situation where people are being forced to work from home because of the pandemic, and everyone's just gone about making that happen without there being too much contention from the employee or the employer. But at some point in time, there will be a shift, and there'll be a shift in the direction that we're talking about, where people will start to feel like they're not being provided with the support and the equipment and the understanding of what it actually means to be set up permanently in a home environment. And our leader's gone on to say, well, many businesses have just mandated working from home with no response from the worker and whether it is suitable. Exactly. There's been no consultation with the worker at all in this instance. And it's kind of like, because it's been a government mandated thing, the worker hasn't really been given an option. But now that the options are open, and if you're, as an employer, still mandating that this happens, or mandating that people should be working in a hybrid role, what are the implications for that person? And this is what we're really suggesting we explore here. We don't have all of the answers, of course, and this is why we are talking about it this morning. There's no regulation yet. There are no laws or regulation that talks about this mandating of working from home. Sandra Connolly has asked the question, have you had any examples of injuries, issues that have arisen? Well, interestingly, yes, we have. We had a situation with a travel business, ironically, that had all of its employees migrated to a work from home environment, and Safe Work carried out an investigation on the basis of 2 employees that were injured. And their claims were that they weren't provided with the right equipment at home, and that they were told that they had to buy their own chairs and desks, and they made a complaint to the regulator about that, and that precipitated a Safe Work investigation. And interestingly, a lot of what we're talking about today has come about because of our engagement and our involvement in that investigation, helping them with the improvement notices that organisation was given, and also what the regulator was stipulating that the worker needed to have to ensure a safe working environment. So when we're talking about electrical safety, fire safety, access and egress, having the right deadlocks at home so that people could leave their home if there was a fire situation. I mean, these are things that we kind of don't really think are work-related issues, but people are working from home. They are productively working from home. They're not just ad hoc workers anymore, and we really need to be thinking about this in a more constructive way.
Yeah, and Suzanne Burden, thank you for your comment up there. I think that probably answers your question in a little more detail about liability. Employers, you need evidence that you've provided the equipment, the support and the education. Yeah. And another one, Sandra, yeah, that's really difficult that employees feel that it's now a right of theirs to work from home, and that's certainly a hard discussion to have.
It is, and if it is a right now, or the person's perception is that they have a right to work from home, well, do you as an employer have a right to compel them to work in a safe way? And working in a safe way means having more than just a fancy chair that is comfortable to sit in, but also having all of those other factors at play, the psychosocial risks, fire safety, electrical safety, access and egress, all of those factors need to be considered now when we're placing people in a situation where they might be working from home for more than just an ad hoc basis.
Great. So we actually are going, oh yeah, great. We've got another question from Suzanne. What happens when we deem?
Well, that's a really good question. What happens when we deem the workspace at home to be unsuitable? Can we force them to return? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an industrial lawyer, so I probably couldn't answer that question from a legal standpoint. But certainly if you look at what the legislation says about safety, you have a duty of care to ensure that the person can work in a safe manner. Now, that's not just about them, like we've said ad nauseum this morning, working like this fellow is on the screen in this perfect postural position. Work is more than just where I sit all day or where I stand all day or what machine I operate all day. Work is a holistic element that forms part of our lives, and you bring more than just your physical self to work. And these are the things that we wanted you to be thinking about today when you're thinking about whether people can work from home and whether they can do it safely.
I think, Suzanne, the best thing to do there is discuss with them what were the risks that you identified and why they are risks. You as the employer don't want them to have these risks, and you need those risks to be mitigated. And I think temporarily, until they have the evidence that they've made those changes to their home working environment, then they can return to working from home and that arrangement. But I think you could possibly have the frank discussion with them that you need to see evidence that those changes have been made before you feel comfortable with them working in and out of that environment. It would be just as if we came into the office and the wall fell down. It's perhaps unsafe to have all of our staff there. So then you do the vice versa and you'd say, look, everyone, we want to have a look at your setups at home. You can work from home temporarily until we have mitigated this risk in the office. It would be very similar if you did identify issues with their working from home environment and you didn't feel comfortable with them having that arrangement.
There's a question from Susie, a good question actually. What was the outcome of the safe work investigation into your client? Are they having to provide appropriate equipment to their workers now? Well, yes, because they compel their workers to work from home, what Safe Work said was they had an obligation to provide two very critical pieces of equipment to that person. If the person did not have a desk that was adjustable and a ergonomic chair that was adjustable, then the workplace had to provide those two items to the person. They also were required for the person to complete a working from home self-assessment checklist, which we've created for that organisation, and that goes to the person before an assessment is completed. If the person then is identified as not having all of the appropriate equipment in place, we would then go out to the workplace and carry out an ergonomic home office risk assessment. So we are looking at all of those elements that we've talked about: fire safety, access, egress, the psychosocial environment, whether there could be an impact on the person's mental health, and then we provide a report, and then the business negotiates with the person what equipment they're going to provide. So it's not a straightforward situation there, but certainly for that business, they've had an enormous cost associated with having to conduct these assessments. And when we created a self-assessment checklist for them, that mitigated the need for every single person to have an occupational therapist or exercise physiologist or physio going into the person's home.
Great. We'll keep talking, taking some more questions. And I did just want to let everyone know we've got a quick poll here. We're hoping to run these sorts of webinars throughout next year. So we just want to get, some information and some feedback from you. So I'm just going to open up a little bit of a poll, and that's really going to help us moving forward. So if you don't mind, if you can please do that poll, that would be really, really helpful. And obviously always email us to admin if you've got any ideas that's going to help you in your business. That's really helpful too, where we really just want to speak on topics that's beneficial for everyone watching. Yeah.
Thank you everyone for participating. We try and make these as fast as possible. We call them a fast 30 because they're really thought pieces. They also introduce you to new legislation, new guidelines that are emerging, and we really like to give you the opportunity of understanding that in greater detail. So thanks very much for having us, and we'll hopefully see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.